Good afternoon. You guys hear me okay? Volume good? You awake? How was lunch? Tasty? One extra. Whoa. Okay. Sorry. Lost control.
Find somebody who knows how to get it over to that.
You cannot have great design without great feedback. You cannot have great design without great feedback. Wow. I'm actually not sure I entirely believe that, even though I said it twice. I think that when you are working on something difficult, you're working on something ambitious, when you're working on something that involves more than one discipline, like all technology does, it probably means you cannot do something great by yourself. And if you can't do it entirely on your own, that means you're going to have to talk to somebody else about your work at one point before you are done. It's essential that you learn, all of us learn, how to be good at getting the kind of feedback we need if we're going to make great work. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about for the next 15 minutes.
Do you want that up on screen now?
I do.
Excellent.
Ah, there we go. Very good. Now, before I talk about critiques and feedback and how to do it well, I want to talk about how to do it wrong. Because it's mostly what goes on in the world. I think fundamentally, we are really bad at talking to each other. Just generally. 50%, some ridiculous number of all marriages end in divorce. And I think part of it is because people just don't know how to talk and they don't know how to listen. And a basic skill that we suck at is just paying attention and listening instead of just waiting for our chance to speak. And part of what goes on in most design critiques are just painful, awful, horrible, scarring experiences. And so when people start talking about critiquing and feedback at conferences like I'm about to do, everyone goes like, oh, I hate getting critiqued. I hate feedback. So let me talk about 3 common experiences that are called critiques that are horrible. Let me get that out of the way, and then I'll talk about how to prevent those things from happening. So the first one is the bloodbath. This is when you are at what's called a critique, and a lot of people show up, enough people that there's factions in the room. There's a faction that is the blue faction. They want everything to be cornflower blue. So anytime any screen shows, where's the blue? Why isn't it blue? Can it be blue? You get the blue faction in the room. Or you have like the social media faction. The guy shows up who always says, can you add Twitter to this? Can you add Facebook to this? There's some guy in the room who's got it. He showed up with an agenda that's really got nothing to do with the actual work being shown. He shows up at every critique to say the same exact thing. Now, when that guy's there, and there's a faction for representing cornflower blue, there's usually some other faction that's now being defensive because they knew he was going to show up. And they have some other agenda about what the future of the company is supposed to be. And this huge battle ensues about the goals for the project. And it becomes something that has nothing to do with good design at all. That's the first bad kind. Second bad kind is called the water torture segment, the water torture experience, where there's one person who's chosen to have their work shown. And everybody else stands up and just pokes at it and tortures why didn't you do this? Why'd you do that? How come this? Why not that? And because most of those other people in the room actually haven't done any work, they haven't made anything, they haven't written any code, they haven't designed anything, they feel pretty damn good. Look at all the holes I can poke. Wow, I must be a fantastic designer. And the one person who actually showed up with to offer anything is made to feel like a victim throughout the entire process. There's no one there who's actually empathetic with what they were trying to do, so the whole experience is miserable for them. And the general idea of trying to progress the design, the whole idea of feedback and critiquing is to give the creator, developer, designer, writer, whoever, give the creator more information so they can make better choices after the critique. That's the entire goal. But in this situation, there's just a victim who leaves feeling like it was a waste to even show their work to that group of people at all. Now, the third kind of bad critique situation that's commonly called a critique is the dog and pony show. The dog and pony show means that it's all a charade. It's all pretense. Everyone shows up, something's shown on the screen, everyone goes, wow, that's awesome, yes, we're great, and everyone leaves. And then in the hallway, people go, I wonder why he didn't do this, or did he consider? But that's hallway chatter. The actual critique is just a show. It's a charade. No actual conversation takes place. Now, between these 3 things, my own skeptical view of the world, my long career managing teams of designers and developers, most of the time in most organizations, regardless of how creative or design-centric the organization is, most time a meeting is called, it's called a critique, one of these three things is going on. And I think it's shameful. I think it's part of why all of our ambitions and all of our talents, all the stuff that we think we're capable of, never ships. Because we end up putting it into these formats. We feel bad about the ambition and the passion and how we put that into our work. We feel bad about it, and we don't want to interact with our colleagues about the work that we're doing. So I'm going to talk about 5 specific things, 5 specific recommendations, pragmatic things that any individual can do to make the whole critique process work better. Number 1 starts by taking responsibility for feedback. If you make something, whether you're a developer or a designer, marketers make something, marketing plans, I don't know. If you make something, you are responsible for getting good feedback about that thing. And a common mistake that creatives make in all fields, writers, painters, musicians, is that they want to postpone the feedback process. They don't want to deal with that. And in the corporate world, we usually allow it to be someone else's responsibility. The project manager guy is going to set up the feedback meeting. Or there's some process that exists, and we wait and we postpone, and we begrudgingly and reluctantly bring our work and we show it, and we allow the critique to happen on other people's terms. That's a failure of attitude. What you want to do instead is say, you know what? I want to make a great thing. I am part way along. I need feedback in order to make it better. I am going to be proactive about it. I'm going to go down the hall. I'm going to find someone I think is smart or has a good point of view that's different than mine, and I'm going to ask them for feedback in the way that I want. It's a very different way to think about critiquing. And as soon as you take responsibility for the feedback, the kinds of feedback you get will be much closer to what you want, because it'll be on your terms. You'll say, I don't want to talk about X, Y, and Z. These are just mock-ups. I don't want to talk about aesthetics. I don't want to talk about visual design and color choices and style. I'm talking about flow. So I'm asking you for feedback about flow. You've now eliminated a lot of the things that might cause a bloodbath to happen. It's not about style. It's not about the logo. You said, we're not going to talk about that yet. So if you're a designer or a developer and you find yourself in a meeting where your work's being critiqued and you didn't set up the meeting, or you didn't define the terms for the conversation, then you've already failed. You've already failed to take responsibility for getting the feedback that you need. Now, the second thing that has to happen, anytime you have a group of people who are meeting about something that might be contentious, there has to be someone in the room who is the designated facilitator. Is there a facilitator in the room? Or someone who likes facilitators? I don't know. Now, facilitation is kind of a namby-pamby consultant-y word. I'm not a fan of namby-pamby consultant-y words. What a facilitator does, that's the person whenever you're in a room and you feel comfortable because you know that if someone is rambling on for too long and won't give up the floor, that some guy in the room is going to interrupt them and say, hey, John, you've been talking for a lot. Can you not talk so other people we can hear their other opinions? That's a facilitation action. The facilitator kind of role is also when someone realizes that there's someone in the room who's smart and important and hasn't said anything yet, and stops the conversation and go, hey, Sally, you haven't spoken up yet. What do you think about this decision? That's a facilitator. They're exercising, they're putting effort forth to make sure the conversation goes in a direction that meets the goals of the conversation. So if ever you're going to have a feedback session, a critique session, 4 or 5 people are there, someone should be chosen to play the role of facilitator. And even if they suck at it, even if they're not good at it, the fact that someone was tasked with the job reminds everyone in the room that there's a role to be played of facilitation that will make the meeting better for everybody. Now, sometimes becoming the facilitator, this is more of my ninja dark arts way to control conversations suggestion. Sometimes the person who's the facilitator is simply the person who goes to the whiteboard first. Whoever goes to the whiteboard first and grabs the pen without saying a word suddenly becomes a facilitator. And the reason why is sort of this inherent latent psychology that we have of being talked to. We grew up for years and years, the person at the whiteboard, the person with the chalk, they're in control. So if ever you want more control over a discussion about your work, go to the whiteboard and start making a list of things people are saying. And all of a sudden, people start waiting for you to finish because they want the next thing they say to go on the whiteboard. I don't know why it works, but it does. These are the little details you want to start paying attention. So maybe you don't have control over the meeting. Maybe you can't call the critique meeting yourself. There are things you can do at the beginning of the meeting to make sure you have more influence over the kind of feedback you're going to get. Third, it's about goals. I only have a few minutes to talk to you, so I can't go into detail about what are good goals for critiques. There's a lot of, you can write goals very poorly, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. But the idea is when a meeting starts and there's work that's going to be shown, there's some list of what are we trying to do here? How will we know this work is good? The simplest way to come up with those goals is to think about the project. What are the goals for the project? What are the customer's goals? Why is this project even going to exist? So you have the customer's needs, the project goals, and there's some feature or something you're making that should be derived from those. Well, what are those? If you have two different designs, what's your list of 4 or 5 things that's going to help you evaluate which design is better? Every critique session should start with a list like that. And it can be very simple, and it can be vague even. But now there's a structure. And that structure gives people a focal point for how they evaluate something. Instead of falling into the trap of just, it's a critique session, so I'm going to critique. Here's something wrong. That doesn't help. If there's a set of goals, now they can go, wait a sec, well, I don't like that, but wait, the goal is to make things I don't like. Hey, we're doing well. Now, related to this is this notion of minimizing the pain of having people look at your work and people tear it apart. And a common strategy that people use is you have multiple alternatives. There's A, B, and C, and D, and E. And that's fine, that's good to do. If you don't have any goals, then you're left with people's own intuitive sense of what they think the project should be or what they think a good design is, which gets very philosophical and very subjective, and that's not really what you want. But if you have some set of goals, then an easy structure to make a critique fairly balanced and fairly fair is that allows you to go, okay, well, compared to the goals, design A, how does it do well against the goals? How does it do poorly against the goals? And you can go through for all the designs, and you leave the critique with a fairly clear and level-headed set of what happened in the critique. We learned about all these different trade-offs in each design. This also highlights, which is a very important creative thinking technique, this also highlights the potential for hybrid designs. Because now you recognize that as you leave the critique, well, design A is good at this stuff, design B is good at this stuff, maybe there's a design we can make that combines them, that's design D, that learned from the information we got out of the critique, and we can now come up with a new design, and do another critique, and on it goes. It's a very simple structure. It's easy to do. Many of you have experienced it. Combine that with facilitation, having a dedicated facilitator, and getting into the room early and owning the whiteboard. Critiques now become a fairly positive and rewarding experience because you're getting information that you need. Now, my fourth point, there's only 2 more to go, so we're on the home stretch here. My fourth point has to do with this notion about criticism in general. It's almost like about rhetoric. There's a failing, a very common human failing we all have, that we confuse things we like with being good and things we don't like with being bad. And that's a tragic confusion to have in a critique. So the best way to illustrate this dichotomy, this division between things, is think of movies. So let's just imagine that Roger Ebert hates horror movies. Hates them. Never seen a horror movie that he liked, ever. And he goes to see a horror movie and he writes a review. Now, if he does a good job as a reviewer, even though he hates horror movies, and if he knows about film, he should be able to identify the characteristics of this film and talk about them in a way that someone who did like horror movies can evaluate whether it's a good horror movie for them to see, even though Roger Ebert hates horror movies. That's the goal. That's what a good critiquer or a good feedback personer does. That's what they do. What most of us do, especially when we're presented with work, fresh out of Photoshop from the designer, like this is so hot and so new, we're like, I'm the first person to dig my teeth into this. We tend to go, well, what do I like? What are my preferences? We're not even conscious of it, and we respond in that way. So it's useful to remind people at the beginning of a critique session about this difference. And the goals should be your tool for separating it out. Good in the context of a critique is a design that meets the goals. Bad in the context of a critique is a design that fails at the goals. Like and dislike are almost irrelevant. Almost irrelevant. I mean, another example is I was playing Rock Band last night. I confess, I like Duran Duran. I do. Hungry Like the Wolf, fun song to play on Rock Band. Would I ever claim that Duran Duran is good music? Probably not. Probably not. That separation is very important to keep in mind. And a lot of people who aren't experienced with thinking about creative work or thinking about useful feedback and feedback that will help progress a design versus not make this mistake, and they confuse the two together. The last point I have for you, the last recommendation I have for you, is about the number of people in the room. I don't know why. I don't know that I've ever seen a study about it. I mean, there's studies about how our minds work and groups of people that how many people we can associate with. Dunbar's number, which comes up a lot with social networking these days, about our brains can only handle 150 to 200 connections in reality. There's another study that probably should be done about the size of a conversation. And I'm convinced, I don't have any data, so you have to trust me, I'm convinced that 5 to 6 people is about the maximum size of a real conversation. It's also the maximum size of at a dinner date or a dinner party or whatever. It's the maximum size you can carry on one conversation. 6 people. Once you have 7 people or 8 people, it starts to get fractured. People start to feel left out. And as soon as people with big egos feel left out, they try to take control. And they're taking control not to help the conversation, but just because they want to participate. All of those things come into play in any critique meeting. If you have 7 people, 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, you're setting yourself up for a bloodbath kind of situation. There's this huge battleground and landscape. It's not about the work anymore. Now it's about the audience. People are speaking because they know certain people in the room. I want to sound smart in front of him because he's responsible for whether I get promoted or not, so I got to talk a lot. There's all these things that filter in that you don't want. And so I apologize for this creepy picture. It was the only rights-free photo of a family at dinner I could find. This also is like Oliver Stone, like, pedophilia. I don't know, something very bad going on here. Anyway, back to critiquing. You want to control the number of people in the room. And maybe because of your work politics, well, Fred has to come, and if Fred goes, Sally has to go. So you end up with 15 people in the room. That's fine, but it's no longer, in your own mind, consider that a critique. That's now become a dog and pony show. So you need a separate forum to actually have your real critique, where you get the real feedback you need to make better work happen. So you have the big meeting that's labeled critique, and everyone shows up, and it's a disaster, it's not useful, there's rat holes and whatever. That's fine. You don't care about it anymore because you've created your own little true critique situation that's structured and controlled in a way that's going to get you what you need. So to sum up, take responsibility for feedback. Don't allow yourself to be victimized by letting other people decide how you're going to be critiqued. You, as a creator, can control that. Be proactive and take control. Pick someone to facilitate. If you want to do it, then just go to the whiteboard, take control that way. Have some goals that are listed so everyone knows how to filter their feedback. Separate light and hate, good and bad, from whether you like it or not. And make sure you have some conversation that's at a dinner conversation size. 5 people, 6 people, 7 people. That's really the only way you can effectively have a good conversation around a design idea. Now, I write a lot about stuff like this. So there's 2 essays I've written that this talk is derived from. One is called How to Give and Receive Criticism. The other is called How to Run a Design Critique. So if you like what I had to say in this short talk, you can go on your phone and find those essays. And if you have questions for me, or disagree with me, or I offended you because you like Oliver Stone, this is how you can contact me and tell me I should be ashamed of myself. So thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of the day.